Ratatouille is Pixar's most warm and fuzzy film. And no, that's not because it takes place in a kitchen, which is warm, and features a rat, who is fuzzy. Well, kind of fuzzy. It's because Ratatouille is the one Pixar film that always, without fail, leaves a big stupid smile on my face at the end of it. It is such a ridiculously feel-good picture. I feel like people sometimes rewatch certain Pixar movies for specific reasons. Sometimes it's to feel excitement, sometimes it's to feel nostalgic, sometimes to just feel sad. But whenever I want to laugh and just bask in the warm glow of a good story, I put on Ratatouille. It is easily Pixar's most charming film. I mean, a certain level of charm is always going to be present in this one. They set the story in France, after all, which automatically gives you like 300 charm points. Just play that Le Festine song, and anyone's heart will immediately grow 3 sizes. But I think what really makes Ratatouille special is its dynamite combination of a cuckoo bananas premise with a completely simple and earnest message. They bring you in with the nonsense and keep you hooked with its big ideas. Just look at how they open the film. This really sets the mood for what's in store for you. This is a movie in which old ladies will fire off shotguns, where a cook will contort himself all over a kitchen, where a head chef will start questioning his own sanity. Yeah, this is that kind of film. I love how completely and utterly insane it is, how it's not afraid to be silly. It's not worried about people pointing at it and saying, that premise is pretty stupid. You have a rat controlling a chef by his hair. Of course it's pretty stupid. But if you don't think a good story can come from this kind of premise, well, you may have missed the point in the movie. Ratatouille has an excellent sense of where the comedy is in any given situation. In my opinion, it's Pixar's funniest film. It's just a laugh riot all the way through. They're particularly good at this dynamic, this confused look from various characters. All of the slapstick regarding Linguini is great. He is just such an amazing vehicle for comedy. I absolutely love their first run at their scheme, where Remy keeps biting him and Linguini just screams and screams and screams by the end of it. They're good at showing both the progression of these two learning, these two interacting with Colette, while giving fresh variations on these jokes. These two are basically a vaudeville routine. Their physical humor and wit are both so on point. Then we get this dynamic with Skinner. I always kind of forget about these jokes, but they really are awesome. He's just constantly blinking his eyes in disbelief, shouting, "The rat! The rat!" I love how progressively agitated he becomes. The most underrated funny moment, one that's forever etched in my brain, has always been his lawyer's reaction to all of this. Should I be concerned about this? About you? Perfect. Ratatouille contains a lot of great character acting in it, which is partially why the jokes are so great. I pulled way too many screen caps for this review, just because the character acting is so darn good. It might be Pixar's best acted film. They hit such a huge range of emotions. The big over-the-top stuff, the extreme and exaggerated reactions. Anton Ego is basically chewing the scenery with his gigantic expressions. But there's a lot of subtle and nuanced acting in here too. I really like these quieter moments between Remy and Linguini and Remy and his father. The story has a good sense of tonal balance. It has a good feel for when to dial back and let the characters talk to each other like real people. Or rats. I feel like Ratatouille is in the Monsters, Inc. school of Pixar's, in that it is one of their more easygoing and angst-free affairs, in terms of the actual conflict in it. All of the characters are basically adults, characters who reconsider, feel remorse, and talk through their issues. This could have been a way more combative story, especially between Remy and his father. We could have seen a dynamic more similar to Coco, where there is conflict over leaving family to follow your dreams. Or something like The Incredibles, where they're fighting constantly. Ratatouille plays his conflict relatively lightly by comparison. His father isn't exactly casting his son away for being a freak. We get the sense that Remy is unhappy with his status quo, but he's not exactly railing against his family and openly disrespecting them. When he reunites with Emile in Paris, he's beyond excited to see everyone again. He even underlines to his father that he'll come visit them, often, now that he knows where they are. He's very upfront about it. This obviously still creates conflict between the two, but we always get the sense that Remy and his father still love each other very much. I think that's one of the big secrets to why this film works, this loving and complicated father and son relationship. Remy very easily could have had a likability problem. There is always going to be the danger with this kind of character that he'll come off as smug, arrogant, and too good for his family. Remy has real talent, why don't these losers just appreciate him? It's important for Remy to have taste, but not come off as a snob. I think by keeping his connection to his family mostly intact, not having a huge blow-up with them, it really helps humanize him. We haven't reached the point of either party refusing to talk to each other. They just fundamentally disagree. Also, poor Emile. He just wants them to get along. Remy's father is great in how he grounds the film, serving as that annoying and pragmatic reminder of, hey, this is actually how the world works right now. Remy gets to go off and live in his fantasy, gets to be friends with a human and drive him around like a mech. They're successful at sprinkling in these little moments throughout, to remind the audience the stakes of the situation. We need someone to burst that bubble. I have to say, I find this scene a little ham-fisted though. Not necessarily showing the rat traps and stuff, we definitely need to be reminded of the danger. Just how his dad asks, "Where are you going?" and Remy replies, "With luck, forward." I don't know, I understand why people like this line. It's just a little too corny and on the nose for me. Almost like Remy is delivering a political soundbite for his campaign. Ratatouille is one of Pixar's most progressive films, and moments like these are the big reason why. And I don't mean progressive in the liberal-conservative spectrum, I mean the more literal definition, that it's a very forward-looking film. It looks at what's happening today and considers how the world could be better in the future. There's definitely some of A Bug's Life DNA in this film. You can see a streak of Flick's character within Remy. This sense of, boy howdy, let's try to make things better. This sense of optimism is one of the most appealing aspects of his character, to be honest. They give us scenes early, like this one, to show what a positive guy he is. He obviously gives Emile a hard time for eating garbage, but they portray it more about his passion. Later on, we get that scene where Remy tries to develop that love of flavor in his brother, and it actually starts to work. Before I forget, it's worth mentioning that Emile is the best. I mean, he's the worst. He literally screws up everything and creates all the problems in the second half, but Emile is still the best. Such a fun character. Way back when I revealed Monsters University, I commented how it's the bizarro version of Ratatouille, how the two films share similar themes, conflicts, and even antagonists. However, Ratatouille gets to explore the character who is successful in these endeavors, making it generally the more positive and optimistic of the two. Ratatouille delivers the mantra of, anyone can cook. However, the film succeeds in not coming off as too naive or idealistic. It gives us plenty of examples that not everyone is going to be naturally gifted at stuff. They play around with Emile, portraying him as someone who honestly doesn't care about flavor. They show that he technically has these instincts somewhere deep within him, but unlike Remy, has neither the drive nor discipline to develop these skills. The whole point of Linguini is that he has absolutely no talent for cooking. Skinner is able to cook, but lacks the ingenuity to actually be great. The film has this philosophical bent to it that is super compelling. It's kind of like Toy Story 2 and how philosophical it can get sometimes. That it presents this kind of axiom up front, and then spends the rest of the story poking at it, exploring how to reconcile the notion of having tastes and standards, but also believing that anyone can cook. One popular interpretation of Ratatouille is that it was an allegory for the Disney-Pixar relationship, that it casts Remy as Pixar and Skinner as Michael Eisner, the former head of Disney. This film was produced when Disney Animation was in a bad place, still cranking out a bunch of straight-to-DVD sequel garbage, poor quality products trading on public recognition. You can obviously see these parallels in the film. When a customer asks for something new, Skinner's immediate solution is to dredge up something out of the vault, something they haven't seen for a while. A talented chef like Colette is basically taught to follow the recipe. There's no place for innovation and creativity, that has already been done. Just stick to the old Gusto formula. I've always felt like Colette is the glue that really keeps the film together. Not only that she provides useful plot things like providing exposition and teaching fundamental skills, but in how cleverly they connect her to Linguini and Remy in their separate ways. We get a lot of good mileage out of her temperamental relationship with Linguini, hitting on a lot of those fun romantic comedy tropes. Also Mace. Their human drama isn't really the emphasis of the film, but they really add enough wrinkles to keep the relationship interesting. With these two, they're successful in establishing the philosophical link. They establish Colette as an outsider, similar to Remy, in her case being the only woman in a male-dominated kitchen. It totally makes sense for her to stick her neck out, be the one to champion that anyone can cook. Then later in the film, they serve up a test of faith for Colette. It's honestly a nice portrayal of the sort of in theory versus in practice argument that we all struggle with. In theory, it's easy to say anyone can cook and smile to ourselves for being good, open-minded people. But will we react that way when it hits close to home? That's the question. The end goal of the film is obviously to convince Ego. He is our final boss, so to speak. But I feel like Colette is an essential bridge character in getting there. Thanks to her, I understand that people can practice what they preach. They do a good job using Colette to mentally prepare us for our final showdown. The only downside with her is that they don't really get the chance to build a real relationship between she and Remy. Everything between them has to be indirect and philosophical. Their direct working relationship ends up being a little undercooked. It would have been nice to see more of this, but it's a necessary sacrifice for the plot. I don't really know how you could improve this. I think Ratatouille has the best ending of any Pixar film so far, and I don't think it's particularly close. At least not yet. The whole ego thing gets a lot of love and attention, but I think what's great about it is its philosophical progression. That it starts in a very internal place, then tests the inner circle characters, and then finishes with the quote-unquote objective outsider. We don't quite test the entire city, but maybe they'll save that for Ratatouille too. Ratatouille? It's actually kind of funny how much they get this internal monologue out of the way right here. That's not to say that this ghostly image of Gusteau is irrelevant. It's important to highlight his inner struggle throughout, but the film knows this isn't an internal battle story. It doesn't have to make this the emotional low. This is the real hurdle he has to overcome, not this. Now, I'm obviously disappointed that all the chefs abandoned him when finding out. I think Pixar was really wise to keep these guys out of focus, keep that distance between them and the audience. We kind of understand why they react this way. We haven't seen that philosophical link that a character like Colette exhibited. It's not realistic for everyone to buy in immediately. That's not how our world actually works. I like that, even in this moment, they still gave them some humanity. This guy totally looks like he's about to cry. He's so heartbroken. This is my favorite shot of the film. I know this one is more famous, but I love this simple low-angle composition right here. Ratatouille is like the king of the low-angle shot. It uses them so effectively. And then they reverse and reveal his father standing there in the kitchen. It's a nice quiet moment between these two. Very simple, very elegantly portrayed. I like that they don't shoehorn this big eureka moment for this guy. That he's suddenly like, oh my gosh, I get his love of cooking now. I like that he gets to confess his belief on his own terms, that it's Remy's bravery in the face of opposition that gets him to buy in. I don't know, there's this sort of loving aloofness between these two that is really compelling to watch. He is a different old-school kind of father figure than the one that we get in most Pixar films. This is probably the first heart-to-heart he has ever had in his life. Now, I would argue that the rats suddenly being able to run the kitchen without training doesn't quite pass the smell test. Even with Remy instructing me, I would be incompetent in the kitchen. There are definitely mechanical skills needed. I'm more inclined to give this a pass, however, since it jives pretty well with the central magical conceit of the film. Also, the moment is breathtaking to behold, and the film would be way worse without it. So forget you, realism. Mr. Anton Ego is obviously the final piece to this puzzle, the sort of elephant in the room I had been avoiding so far. He's just so intimidating, I don't want him to judge what I'm about to say. He's a character who gets introduced at the very beginning, and then disappears for something like 45 minutes. I think they were smart to play it cool with this guy, and not shoehorn him into the plot for the sake of visibility. What is he really gonna do during all of this? Just comment on stuff? It's way better to just introduce him as an antagonistic force in the backstory and deal with a character like Skinner first. Maybe it would be more elegant to only have one antagonist. Maybe the handoff between mid-boss and final boss is a little clunky and formulaic. But I think it's compelling to see such a mirror image of Skinner. It's too easy to say anyone can cook when you're overcoming someone as creatively bankrupt as this guy. It is way more interesting to prove this argument against someone with actual taste and standards. I've seen some people interpret this guy as a sort of take that against critics. And I guess I see where they're coming from. They really do play up his snobbiness with his caustic and pompous way of speaking. His almost vampire-like design certainly grants him no favors. They definitely prey upon our negative stereotypes about critics. Despite all this, I feel like Ego is one of the most kind and honest portrayals of a critic I have ever seen in a film. I think we all have to be realistic about the nature of criticism. He basically opens his ending monologue by describing how easy the act is, and its relative unimportance compared to actual content creators. This is harsh, but I don't think it's necessarily unfair. I think what's great about his portrayal is his intellectual honesty. The film is masterful in implying that maybe he doesn't have any integrity. Maybe he is a guy who builds his conclusions based on his assumptions. We are totally set up to assume the worst. But for as much of a nitpicky snob he is, there is something deep inside him that won't betray his taste and standards. He's not a liar. He knows he was served something great, and will declare it so, even if it requires admitting that his worldview has been shaken. The selection of Ratatouille for this final dish is almost disgustingly perfect for this moment. Ugh, the pun, the symbolic nature of the dish, it kinda hurts my brain how perfect it is. You can tell Pixar was a little worried that the ending might come off as a coincidence, that Remy basically lucked his way into invoking an emotional response. They were smart to put Skinner in the restaurant too, to confirm that the Ratatouille was indeed pen-droppingly amazing. Pixar basically serves up Ratatouille in every one of their films at the conclusion. They're not successful only because they poke at our nostalgia. They're successful because their dishes are executed well. I like that Ego gets the honor of clarifying and resolving the anyone can cook question that had been haunting the film. That it's him that puts the emphasis on the anyone. It's not necessarily that everyone will be great at everything and everything is above criticism. Criticism is okay. It's the open-minded aspect, that greatness can come from anywhere, and to give people and concepts a chance to shine. Maybe we shouldn't be so quick to write off something we don't fully understand. The book hasn't been written yet. I admit, Ratatouille has been a formative film for me in terms of how I look at media. I think it mellowed me out in a lot of ways and made me less stubborn in my thinking. Ratatouille shines a spotlight on the infinite possibilities of the world, that maybe something great can come from something so humble and so uninspiring. Maybe something that even seems ridiculous and unintuitive at first. Maybe it'll turn out to be mediocre, statistically it most likely will be, but maybe it'll surprise us. Ratatouille ends up having a strong sense of balance because it champions these lofty ideals without sacrificing the logic of our real world. It's not like they kept Gusteau's open in the end, or that rats and humans started living together. Sure, that song is super charming and makes me feel good. However, there are definitely strings attached to this happy ending. Ratatouille strikes me as a film about small philosophical victories, that something was proven, some theoretical progress was made. Maybe things will eventually get better. I think what makes Ratatouille one of Pixar's best films is that it keeps its finger on the pulse of this message while still creating strong character bonds and incredibly fun moments. It doesn't sell out its sense of fun for its lofty ideals. It doesn't sell out its father and son relationship for a silly romp through a kitchen. Some might argue this creates a lack of focus, or that the film is just juggling disparate elements. Maybe they're just throwing a bunch of random ingredients into a pot. But there is a thoughtfulness to the selection of these elements, a strong sense of how much is too much. These individual flavors complement each other exceptionally well, blending together into a final product that is both charming and meaningful. It's hard to stay in a bad mood after having a meal this ridiculously good. Also, Linguini has a subplot about being Gusto's long-lost son or something.